Hey, so I know a lot of you seeing this already know me, but for those who don't, I'm Drake, and I grew up in a daycare, my family's own daycare, since before I was born, and I've actually been working at the daycare for over 13 years now, on and off, and working with children for at least 13 years, and also working in other environments as well with students. And I just was over at a client's house, and we were talking and discussing kind of the challenges with reading in school, and how in school right now, you know, if you look across the nation, if you look at the scores of children reading, their scores have dropped to the lowest point they've been since the 90s. And I was just explaining how the schools don't really know how to teach reading. And what was interesting about it was she was telling me she completely understood. We were talking about how she was telling me how phonics is a slow process, which I know this, but it's interesting to hear other people who haven't maybe done as much research as I have also recognize that phonics is slow for reading in itself. But also, we were talking about the look-say method, and talking about the whole language method, and how, you have those picture books where you're flipping through the book, and as you're going through the book, it says I see a, and it'll say cat, and there'll be a picture of a cat, and then on the next page it'll say I see a, and it'll say butterfly, and it'll be a picture of a butterfly, but it doesn't actually teach the kids how to read. And she was telling me, yeah, I put my hand over the pictures because I know that my kid is just looking at the picture and guessing, and that's not reading, right? And a lot of kids can look like they're reading by doing that, but it's not actually teaching them to read effectively. And so I was showing her, we were installing TechnoTutor, and just going through it real quick and making sure she understood it. And we started talking about, specifically with her son, he has an IEP, and at the school that he was attending, they weren't actually tending to his needs. She was telling me how at that school, they were essentially telling her that, oh, you've got a great kid, and he's so funny, he's always participating in all of this, but they weren't actually tending to his needs as far as what he was understanding. And she was telling me, like, he would come home with assignments, and on the assignment, he's trying to spell bake, and he spells it B-A-K, but he misses out on the E, and they don't correct that. And she was saying how it's nice that they care about him, and that they think he's a great kid, and they like him and all that. That's nice, but I'm putting him in school so he can learn something, so he can be effective, right? That's not helping him to be effective. They're just basically passing on this like, oh, well, he's progressing in some way, but it's not actually teaching him. Like, I get it that they're not trying to force him to do anything, but it's not actually giving him a real foundation. And so it was cool, we were talking about that, and then she was saying how, because of the classrooms that they had to switch him in and out of, and all of these things going on, basically how it's affecting him socially and emotionally, that now her son isn't even with the same kids in the same class, and not with his friends anymore. And he started asking for homeschooling. And my suggestion was, well, please homeschool him. If he wants to be homeschooled, homeschool him. I will support you in that. I know how to support you with that. And I just started showing her how she could use TechnoTutor to learn new vocabulary and share that vocabulary with her son, obviously, and then actually teach him. And it doesn't have to be in this really formal style. It doesn't have to be like, oh, now we're doing school, and now, you know, we have to act in this way or whatever. But rather, it can be a very casual thing where you've given your child the vocabulary, and once they understand the word that you're teaching them, then you can teach them everything else. And I had this cool way of explaining it that I wanted to share, which is, you know, it's kind of like when you're watching a movie or you're telling a story and you come in, like if you've just come in on this story, right? You come in on this story and you're sitting there and like, you're like, wait, what is he talking about? What's going on? You don't understand because you didn't get the intro. You didn't get the beginning. If you're watching a movie, the same thing. It's like, you know, I'm sure if you've ever been like with like a boyfriend or girlfriend and you're sitting there and one of you is paying attention, like, you know, the other one's not paying attention, and you're watching and they come in and they're like, what did I miss? What's going on? You're so confused. You're still watching the story unfold, but you're like, wait, why did that happen? You're not sure exactly where it begins, and you don't have the full understanding of it. Well, that's kind of like with words. When we're learning new words, if you're trying to explain something to someone, but they don't have the context, in the human brain, the intro to that story is the letters and then the words, right? And so to have the letters, which then form the words, then once you have the words, then when somebody's talking to you and explaining something and you have all those words integrated, then you're able to understand everything, all the context of what they're saying, because you know where it starts. You can go back and say, oh yeah, we're talking about fuel. I know the word fuel, and I know that I know how it's spelled. I get what we're talking about. This is all within the context of this word fuel, or whatever it is that you're talking about or learning at that moment. There's a car doing donuts in front of me right now, which is interesting. But in that way, any parent has the ability to teach their kids at home. Just imagine, you know, if you're teaching your kid the word, let's say bake, right? You're teaching your kid the word bake, and with that, then you say, well, bake is to put something in the oven and make it hot, right? And cook it or prepare it in that way, right? And then you can even go further, and throughout your day, once they have that word integrated within them, once they understand that word, then you can just keep giving them more and more explanation and more context, and say, like, because you know what the word bake is, right? And so you can just say, well, you know, we bake cookies, we bake chicken, we bake cakes, you know, these are the kinds of things that you need to know about baking. You know, you need to know about the temperature, and, you know, this is what an oven is, and just giving them all that context. That's real learning. That is actually helping them, as opposed to, like, what is the actual purpose of school to begin with? Actually consider, why do we put our kids in school? So that they can live in a society, right? And actually be effective in that society. Well, it's interesting because we learn about, in school, we learn about maybe plants and biology, right? But what relevance does that have for most people? Most people, they're just looking at that and they're disinterested, because it's like, I don't plant things. I don't have time to plant things. I've got to go home and do homework, you know? But if you're at home and you're building a garden because that's what you and your spouse decided to do in your home, and then you're teaching about plants, and you're teaching about biology, and you're teaching about, you know, male and female plants and seeds and things like that, well, then you actually have context. The child has context, that it has relevance for their life. They might actually do something with that information rather than just memorize it just to pass a test and then dump that information later where they're never going to use it again. But if you're already, you know, doing that in your home. You're just living your life, and then you're giving them the information, having them understand what you're actually saying. Like, just to have that ability to understand that information is really giving them a real education. As well as, generally speaking, when you're at home, you know what your kid needs. You know what's important to your child, or for you even. And you know where their challenges are and their struggles, and you know where to shore them up. Well, I think the challenge that most parents have, and this is what this particular parent was saying to me, is that, in the past she didn't have the tools to do all of this. Well, if you have the tools, wouldn't you want to be in control of what your child's actually learning? Wouldn't you want to actually provide for them the best education? Like, if you knew how to do it, then wouldn't you want to do that? And so that was something that we discussed today, and I thought that was really cool, and I wanted to share that with you guys.